Today on UVA Legends podcast, I have Jake McInerney, kicker from the 1990 UVA team that set all kinds of records. At first, started off really good, but it's definitely an historic team. Jake set some records himself as kicker for UVA. He had 89 of 90 extra points in his time there, 31 of 37 field goals. That might still be that's probably that's the fifth all time in the ACC, and arguably still the UVA record. I know we can get into the details there. At one point, he had 17 in a row, field goals in a row, and 88 extra points in a row. Jake is an 86 graduate of Ocala, I believe. Is that right, Jake?
That's correct.
Yeah. And anyway, Jake, great to meet you. Thanks for doing this.
Oh man, good to be remembered all these years down the road, man. You know, we're getting old, and it's fun to have somebody say, "Hey, you're a legend." You know, I always thought that, but good to hear someone else say it.
Well, how often do you think about that season? I mean, I know both seasons were important to you because you finally got a chance to play. But how often do you think about that 1990? There's a documentary on ESPN. I mean, it was such an amazing year for us.
Every day. I mean, you know, you think about, I don't know, defining moments in your life and this kind of stuff. And I mean, I know it didn't happen, but, you know, ultimately it didn't happen. But, you know, we talk about the lessons learned and not so much could have beens, because everybody's got a could have been or should have been, and it doesn't matter. I can tell you all kinds of that. But, you know, you learn lessons and you say, you know, the thing that we always harken back to is like, the experience that we had at Virginia, I don't think can be replicated anywhere else. I mean, you compare it to say, all right, I went to Alabama and, you know, I'm one of, you know, 10 teams that won the national championship there. And imagine showing up at that reunion where there's 1,000 guys wearing a national championship ring. Who cares, right? We had the experience at Virginia from going from really never having gone to a bowl game. You know, they had gone to a Peach Bowl in '84, first ever, to we come in, we're 3-8, and it's like, well, this may be the way it is. This place might just be some weird place that always stinks, to then building up. And then, you know, our fourth year, we win a share of the ACC and go to a New Year's Day Bowl, which is Citrus Bowl was, which is crazy. And then the next year, of course, we're 7-0, beat Clemson, and we're number one in the nation for, I think, like 3 or 4 weeks, which that season was topsy-turvy. That might have been the longest a team held number one during the season, right? And it didn't work out, but we still go to the Sugar Bowl, another New Year's Day Bowl, which back then I think there were like 8 bowls. That's significant. And then we get 2 Heisman guys, Shawn and Herman. And then, of course, we, you know, bring in the number one recruit in the nation the year before, Terry Kirby, Chris Slade. So we think about it like that way. It's like that experience, we got just about every experience of college football you can get, being lousy to being to the top of the rock. And, you know, a lot of us guys, when we talk, we wouldn't trade that for anything. I wouldn't want to be one of 1,000 guys walking around with the Alabama national championship ring. I mean, I'm sure they're tickled pink and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if it would mean that much to me. So
it's almost like they have pressure to win one. If you don't win one, then something's wrong with you. If you played out.
Yeah.
So when I was reading about you online, and I know, and we can get to the details of those games, but after redshirting and not playing the first 2 years behind Mark Inderlied, you got your chance in your redshirt junior year, and you missed a few early, but then you righted the ship and you went on a streak. And I read somewhere where you were afraid if you missed another field goal, you may not get another chance. And I
was afraid of anything at that point.
Yeah. So when you look back, your life probably would have been much different if you never had that run in the UVA team. The reason why I say that is I remember I made the basketball team my junior year at Robinson, and it was very close. There was another guy who played on the team the year before. It was really between me and him for that last spot, and I couldn't have blamed the coach if he made it, but I made it, and my whole life would have been different. But my friends at UVA, we all played ball together. I coached in the area. My whole life was almost made different because I made that varsity team and I was part of the program. in a way, do you feel like your life would have been totally different if you did not stay in that in the team and play all those games?
Yeah, yeah. There's no question. I mean, who knows where it might have led me. I mean, I might have been so upset with myself, and then I might have said, "All right, well, you got to be somebody," and then I might have buckled down on my grades and gone to Harvard Law School, or gone into the Air Force and became the world's greatest fighter pilot or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, there's always these adages about it's how you react to situations, and you don't know. I mean, there's a famous story about the farmer and the horse, and all these bad things happen, and the farmer's always saying, well, you don't know if it's bad, it's just how you react to it. I mean, I don't want to bore you with the story, but who knows. But I do think, you taking the positive of it, you say, yeah, man, all right, look, man, it got down a little bit for you. And Welsh will always have said, like, no, I wasn't about to replace you, because you're always the best guy in practice. And he valued practice so much that I think he might have stuck to that. Like, if someone's not beating out in practice, it's just not going to happen in the game. But nonetheless, I feel, you take benefit and value from bouncing back from, it's kind of down, man. I was 1 for 4. It was getting weird, right? And then, I ripped it off. But like, yeah. But again, who knows, man? It might have been so frustrating that I just went on. I had to have something else in my life that was great, and I would have dedicated myself to something else. So who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Well, we're gonna get to those golden UVA days, but let's go back to McLean and eventually Arlington. I also read somewhere that you were a pretty good quarterback in other positions, but you didn't have a whole lot of speed, so you eventually gravitated towards kicking. So tell us a little bit about how you got into sports, and if your family were athletes as well.
Yeah. Well, so I was an Air Force brat, right? And like, up until I was about 10, we didn't live in the United States. My dad was an Air Force pilot. It was called USAFE, United States Air Forces Europe. And so we're over in like Germany and Turkey and England and this kind of stuff. And back then it was like, there was like one main base is Ramstein, but then there was all these little periphery bases that just didn't have a lot of stuff. Like, we had Armed Forces Network television, not a lot of great organized sports. I didn't play sports, right? I mean, I went out and caught turtles and stuff and whatever else you do. It was just kind of weird. And every 2 years we'd move. And then, so we came back to the States. We actually moved to Annandale when I was like 11, right? And my dad was working at the Pentagon. And my parents were like, all right, you got to play a sport. And I was like, I don't even know what they are. But, I mean, I understood the concept, saw kids running around with balls and stuff, kicking balls and stuff. But, they're like, you're just going to sit around and drink chocolate milk and watch cartoons all day. That's not, you're going to go play sports. So they signed me up for the basketball league, right? I'd never played a sport. And my first memory of a sport was, if you played basketball, as you alluded to, the coaches always had those clipboards, and on the front, they had their papers, and on the back, it had a little diagram of a half court of a basketball, and they could mark X's and O's on it. And they marked my X in the corner. So I guess I was a forward. All right. So I was like, and he's like, this is where you go. You got to make sure that you lock that area down, or whatever terms he was saying. He's like, oh, yeah. And then so I did. And then the game started. The ball goes to the other side of the court. Well, since his little diagram is only half court, I stayed in the corner thinking he told me to be here, and everyone's yelling, no, go. I'm like, no, the coach told me to be here. What are y'all saying? And it was harrowing. And then I get, I'm like, oh my God, what, people are yelling at me, like, but he said, stand here. So I freaking hated it. Right. And then they made me play. And I don't say made me. I mean, your parents push you into the right things and say, you got to do something. And they put me on the soccer team, hated it. And I was into Kiss back then. So I just, that music band, I just always be thinking about, man, I wish it was like playing guitar on Kiss or something. And, the ball would come flying my way, and I'd be like, oh, this stinks. And then, so, that's like 2 or 3 years of just like, oh man, this is horrible, but you got to do it. And then, we moved to McLean, Virginia. Kind of, you can see our house from the Beltway, right? You can still see it from the Beltway, but we moved over there. And, it was like 5th grade. And I remember watching a football game, Redskins game, right? And I remember, as my dad was watching it and sitting around watching it and kind of paying attention a little bit. And it gets to the end of the game, and man, I've tried to find out which game this was, but I haven't. But Mark Moseley comes running in and kicks a game winner, and I was like, Dad, that's what that guy does? And he's like, yeah, he's a kicker, and that. And I'm like, there's guys that do that. And he's like, yeah. The next day, there was a Toys R Us on Little River Turnpike.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I got to get a football. And, we're over there for something. And it's no longer there, the Toys R Us, but we go in and there's a K2 football for $12. My dad buys it for me. And I'm like, oh my God. And I fricking kicked that thing till it turned into a pumpkin. I mean, it had, big old bulges all over it and I just went crazy with it. I mean, I was just like hyper focused, and I was like, this is what I want to do. What that guy did, I want to do that. And I figured it out. And I was a toe kicker, right?
I was going to say, yeah, Mark Moseley was a toe kicker.
Even though I played soccer, but I was like, well, this is how they do it. Like back then, there's still some toe kickers, and I was like, that's how they do it, man. And so, I did that for a couple of years, and then like I started playing, and then the next year, like sixth grade, I started playing little league football. How it's age, weight. So I started playing 85 pounders, and I loved it. And I played everything because you could back then. I'm just a kicker. They'd be like, get lost. So I played like quarterback and running back, and I just loved. You had a playbook. If you understood it, here's what you do. And man, it just, I said, that's what I'm going to do. I don't know, man. Some guys they want to be a fireman or go chase dinosaurs or whatever. That was what I was going to do. And, from then on, I said, all right. And then, so, I played little league all the way, like sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and up to 110 pounders. You play it all, but I did, I started figuring out like, okay, I'm pretty good with this group of kids, but there are kids my age that are in 110 pounders or 125 pounders. When I get to high school, this is going to be weird because they're going to be better or faster or whatever. So maybe the kicking's a deal. And then that's when I kind of figured it out. And then so, I went to, public high school or public junior high and all this kind of stuff, public schools. And then before high school comes, I, given my past of moving every 2 years, I don't know if you're, growing up in Robinson, you probably knew a lot of military kids, and you might have been one yourself, but you move every 2 years, generally speaking. And I said, man, this is going to be weird. I've been with this same group of kids for 4 years, and now I'm going to go to high school with them for another 4. That's 8. I don't know about this. And I brought up to my parents, like I knew some kids that were going to O'Connell. I didn't know anything about it. I was like, but I knew they had a great soccer team because they had this guy named Matt Addington, who was a parade All-American the year before. And I kind of followed their football team because I knew these other families that played. And out of the blue, I was like, hey, maybe I'll go there. And they're like, if that's what you want to do, sounds cool to us. Because my dad had gone to Gonzaga when he was a kid. He was a military brat himself. He lived for 1 year in D.C., back in the 40s. That's how old he was. But so he's like, yeah, that's cool. And I did. And I got there and it worked out. I mean, that's another story in itself. But like by happenstance, like Eric Metcalf happened to be there. And I was like, well, this worked out. Because he's like the greatest, besides Chris Warren, he's like one of the greatest players from this area, So.
Well, was it clear at the time that toe kickers were done? I mean, my high school classmate, Joel Dempsey, he kicked at Robinson. He toe kicked at Robinson. By the time he got to UVA, they moved him to punter, and I think he may have kicked off some.
He did.
But his field kicking was done. It was clear that toe kicking was done when you're growing up.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell it started getting that way because more and more, if you watch college and NFL games, it'd be fewer and fewer. And it's interesting because like the summer before my 8th grade year, I was reading the sports page and there's this little tiny ad in the bottom. It said Mark Moseley kicking camp.
Yeah, I remember that.
I went crazy. I said, I got to go to this. I got to go. And I did. And this was like the summer of 1981. And it was at Western Maryland College. And I go up there, I'm in the 8th grade, and there's like 30 kids. There are like kids from Pennsylvania, Virginia. Chris Kinzer was there. You remember him from Virginia Tech. Bunch of toe ballers, and a few soccer style guys. By then I was dyed in the wool soccer style. I'd made the transition like after a year of trying to be a toe jammer, and I couldn't ever get one of those cool square toed shoes. I just didn't make them anymore. So I started, and I'd played soccer enough, and I started kicking soccer style. So I go to this camp in Moseley, and I did well. I mean, it was kind of at the beginning of what I'd call the kicking industry or whatever. He took me under his wing, and I remember him saying, "Look," he's like, "I don't care how you get it through the post, man, but you got this." I was back then. I mean, I'm not this way now, but I was kind of long and lanky, and he's like, "You got this stroke." And I mean, he really did take me under his wing, and this was like before my 8th grade. And he's like, and I, a lot of people, you remember your athletic times the way you want to remember them. But I do remember like a couple of the college guys coming up to me, and they're like, "Man, we haven't seen, you got something going on. You gotta stick with this." And that was a spark. And then from that point on, I'd always worked with Moseley at his camps and stuff like that throughout high school and even into college. But I asked him, I was like, "Well, you guys are toe ballers," and he's like, "I don't care, man. He's like, that might be going away anyhow. You got this way of doing it, and it works, and I like what I see, and blah, blah, blah." So yeah, I did. But toe balling, in my opinion, kind of was on its way out by that point anyhow,
I'm sorry, Jake. Who are your other heroes? Like I remember the first soccer style kicker I remember watching was Garo Upremium from the Dolphins. I'm a couple years older than you, and you may have been out of the country, not following football. But who are your first kind of role models, maybe besides Mark Moseley?
Robin Olds, he's a fighter pilot, and Danny Walsh, another fighter pilot. These are all my dad's buddies and stuff, and I grew up around hearing stories about them and meeting them and stuff. Not a lot of football player, but so yeah, man. I mean, those guys, larger than life guys, and then yeah, I mean, so from the football thing, it was Mark Moseley. Loved, he was just he was a guy that wanted to help kid. He was like, this is what I do, and I know how to do it, and he was great. In terms of the kicking world, I like Kevin Butler. I mean, if you remember him from Georgia's, that was later on, but I mean, the guy was like bombing 60-yard field goals and stuff. I always like thought he was cool, and like John Lee from UCLA, that kind of stuff,
Yeah. Who was the O'Connell football coach? Now, I know the private schools have actually gotten really strong in football over the last 40 years since we played. But what was O'Connell like at the time, and who was the coach?
Well, it was pretty cool. So, I roll in there, and I didn't, most of the kids there, had gone to the little parochial elementary schools, and they knew each other. And I was kind of like, who's this guy? And I was like, I don't care, because I was always that way. And I went out for the soccer team and the football team. So they both played in the fall, right? And I was still kind of like, I still dug soccer. I got pretty damn good in a very compressed amount of time, just because me and my buddies were focused on it, and we'd play a lot of soccer. And I also knew that it helped me play football. So I said, all right, I'm going to go out for both of them. And I had heard before, frankly, at O'Connell, they let this soccer player come and kick at football games, but he could play soccer. So I was like, and like I already told you, I thought this Matt Addington guy was cool. And I was like, all right, I'm going to be that next guy. I wasn't that good. I wasn't on that level, but so I went out for both of them. And I went, the football coach was this guy named Bill Carpenter, great guy. All right. And he recognized in me early, some talent. He's like, hey, you just need to come. If you want to just come to the games and kick for us, that's great, because I see what you can do. And this is freshman football. I mean, not a lot of field goals are kicking then, but he's like, but let me tell you something, man. I can't promise anything, but this seems like if you focus on this, you could get a college scholarship. And then I was like, yeah, but I still kind of have this soccer thing. And a weird thing happened like in that August, late August, like right before both seasons, we had already been, and I'd made both teams and I said to the soccer coach, hey, the football coach is saying he'll let me kick. Is that cool with you? And he said, yeah, that's cool, but I'm not going to allow you to miss a practice to go to a football game. And then I started thinking, well, okay, that doesn't sound that great. And then I got injured on my leg. I fell off my bike. I don't know what the hell I was doing, but I had all these stitches up and down my right leg. And I was like, all right, I can't really play soccer because if I fall down, it'll bust open, but I can kick. You just kick and run off the field. So I had all these stitches in my leg and I went and kicked. And then the soccer coach comes and he sees me at a football game, and he's standing there twirling his whistle. And he's like, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I can't practice soccer because if I fall down, but I can kick, and he's all upset at me. And I was like, all right, I'm done, man. You go, well, I made the team and I had to cut players. And I'm like, I'd talk to these guys. They'll gladly come back out, man. I'm done. And so, but one of the coaches at the time, the football coach, it was either Bill Carpenter or my subsequent coach, Jim Hayes, said, hey, man, you got to know something. Like, there are 95 scholarships in football. Soccer gives 11. So if that helps you make a decision, and not that that was my sole goal, but, given all the facts and stuff, I said, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play football and focus on it. And, and then.
Well, who was this Freddie James guy that had
He was cool.
Technically,
So Freddie James,
yeah.
His son was on the team. My classmate, Robbie James. Robbie James is in the semi-pro football Hall of Fame. He's a badass, right? And so Freddie was this guy. And I don't know if you have ever heard the story in the late 50s. There's a football team at Washington Lee High School that won the state championship by this guy that kicked a field goal at the very end, and a very famous team. The guy that kicked the field goal ended up coming to Virginia as a quarterback. And it's back in the 50s. So it's kind of, who knows kind of stuff. But Freddie James was a running back on that team. And by the time I was in high school, he was a dance teacher. All right. And he was kind of out there in a good way. Right. And so, and his sons were into soccer. So he was coaching them soccer. Robbie was on the football team. They lived nearby the school. So he, for whatever reason, said, I'm going to become a kicking coach. And I was his pupil, and I was willing, because I was like, you're out there and I'm out there too. So we're going to do just fine. And he loved it, man. And even though his son, Robbie was kind of a bigger guy. So he played line and played well, played semi-pro. And I think he played at Ferrum or something like this, but he could also kick the shit out of it. But Freddie James was just like, hey, this is what you're going to do. And he was selfless, and he was a coach, and he loved coaching. And he was kind of a legendary guy, man. And he died of cancer, but whatever. I mean, this is like 5 years ago, but, did he know a lot about kicking? Maybe not. Did he know a lot about what's going on up here? Maybe not. Did he help me out? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I know you hit a 45-yard field goal your junior year to help put you on the map. It was a game winner.
Yeah.
Who was that against? What was the circumstance?
That was against St. John's, right, in our homecoming game, and it's kind of cool. The year before, so now, progressing into, I started playing varsity my sophomore year, and that was Eric Metcalf's junior year. We were 9-2 that year, ranked number 10 in the region, which is pretty good for us. I don't think we'd ever gotten there. Eric Metcalf was first team All-Met. It was the next year that Chris Warren got him for first team All-Met, but Eric Metcalf was first team All-Met. So we're big stuff now, right? And then so the next year we were rolling in. It's Eric's senior year. We had lost a bunch of these badass linemen. I always say offensive linemen, you got to have that. And like all these guys like Tommy Riley and Pat McCormick and all these badass guys, they had graduated. So, but we still had a pretty good team, and we ended up 8-4 that year. And so Eric got suspended for the St. John's game. He had a little issue at home. His dad was coach. Terry Metcalf was one of the coaches. Dad was cool, man, but he was pretty tough on Eric. and Eric did something wrong at home. And so they said, you ain't playing. His dad said he ain't playing. So he's on the sideline. And we go into the game and it's 7-7 tied. And that was the Metro Conference. Back then, the Metro Conference, most high school leagues didn't have overtime. They did 15-minute overtime, sudden death, like the NFL. And 7-7, we battle back, and then we drive down the field and we get in position. I'd never kicked a game winner. I'd kicked some field goals, and I was pretty good for a high school kicker. I mean, a lot of times back then it was just like getting the ball over the line was half the battle, but I could make them and stuff. And I had a tough game 2 games before where I missed 2 field goals against DeMatha, right? We ended up losing. That wasn't the margin of the loss, but field goals a lot of times are momentum, right? You get that momentum stolen away from the offense, it translates into something else bad. We lost like 30-12 or something, but maybe if I'd made the field goals, we would have kept the momentum and blah, blah, blah. Who knows? And so I'm like, oh my, we go out and my holder, Jimmy O'Dono, and I'm like, oh my God, dude. And he's like, hey man, it's freaking weird. And I'm like, yeah, dude. And Fred Benevento comes out. He's the coach now. And back then, I guess the coaches could come out into the huddle, and he's standing in the huddle, and he's like, hey, McInerney, you owe me one. I knew he was referring to the DeMath game. And I'm like, I guess I do. And I drilled it right down the middle. And yeah, we did great. So we won 10-7, but that was cool. First time,
Yeah.
But Jimmy O'Dono was like, yeah, man. It's like, oh, we got to do it just like practice, man. We've done this so many times. I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. Like, what are we doing, man? Why are we freaking out? Just kick it like you do in practice. So I remember him saying that, and it worked out. But
well, you also mentioned offline Terry Metcalf, who's one of my favorite running backs. He was little guy for NFL, but powerful, great moves, great balance. Obviously, father of Eric. Terry had some influence on you as well. What was his influence on you?
He did. So he was, when his son was on the team, he came out and was coaching, and he was cool. And he played a lot in the CFL where, CFL apparently is more kicking because of the way the field is, and it's 3 downs and there's 12 players. So kicking is very big in the league. And he's like, they had this rule in the CFL. You could actually, if you caught a punt, you could punt it back. The returner could. And if you got it in the end zone, it's called a rouge or something. So he learned how to punt because he was a punt returner, and he was just a great athlete. And so he was always talking to me about how, and he paid attention to the CFL kickers and punters. And he's always, as focused as he was on, the offensive side and, Eric's running and all this kind of stuff and making up plays. I mean, he was always telling me stuff that the CFL kickers did. And he was cool. I mean, he was, like I said, he was like a guy, except for his size. I mean, he wasn't tiny. He was like 5'11", 180 or something like that, but incredibly fast and very physically talented, but just like this technician of like paying attention to how people did stuff. And he helped me out a lot. And he gave me, he's like, yeah, you have a talent, man. You gotta, you're the custodian of that talent. You're going to have to make sure that you push this through too. You'll get help on the way, but you got to make sure you're pushing it too. So great guy.
I know there had been word at UVA that you may punt some. And like I said, my high school and college classmate, Joel Dempsey, was turned into a punter. Did you punt for O'Connell as well?
I did. And so, yeah, just by happenstance. I mean, if you're standing around on a high school team and all you're doing is kicking, sooner or later, they're like, well, all right, do something else, punt. And I played positions in practice. I played defensive back and stuff and, whatever, but not really very mainstream. But so I picked up punting and, I figured, well, just get good at it too, and I learned how to punt and pay attention and I actually became a good punter. And the weird thing is that the way Virginia I wanted to go to Virginia. I mean, make no mistake about it. I mean, being from Northern Virginia, you hear about it all the time. Back then, of course, it was like Ralph Sampson this, Ralph Sampson that. And so it's on your mindset. But George Welsh came to one of our practices. You know, back then, I mean, you'd see Joe Paterno, you'd see all these guys because Eric Metcalf. You know, I mean, they were going crazy over him. It's probably like Robinson with Chris Warren. And so these guys would be at our practice. And then so one day, you know, we had little bleachers, and I'd always kind of look over and see who's there. And like, nobody's here today, so I won't do anything. But like I saw a couple of coaches, I saw George Welsh up there. So I kind of stand right in front of them while the team is practicing over here, and I'd punt across the field. And I just said, all right, just start hitting some balls. And I was bombing them over the fence. I mean, it was going crazy. And our team trainer used to sit right there in the little bleachers, you know, waiting for someone to get hurt, I guess is what he was doing. But he went to UVA, this guy did. And he's sitting next to Welsh, and he said they struck up a conversation, but knowing how Welsh was, I was like, nah, you probably didn't. But because that guy didn't talk to anybody. But like he said, Welsh was like, who's that guy? You know, because he saw me punting. And Doc Tilson was like, oh yeah, that's Jake McInerney. He's an even better field goal kicker, you know. And then he told me that after practice, he's like, Welsh was like, who's that guy all the time? And then it was a Thursday practice, which we do special teams. And so then I did kickoffs and field goals, and I was just bombing them all over the place. And so from that point on, I was like, you know, I think that, you know, I'd gotten recruited by other schools, but I was like, that's where I want to go, you know.
Well, you hit a 55-yarder also your senior year, which was also a big moment for you.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I kicked a 50-yarder the week before against Yorktown, and I made it like by a lot. And then the next week, I think it's Cardozo, like for whatever reason, they weren't a good team, but like I think we ended up trying like 3 or 4 or 5 field goals, and I made 3 of them, one of them a 55-yarder, had the wind behind it, but it made it, you know. Wasn't a great kick. It just kind of spun sideways and went in, but it was cool.
Yeah. So you end up, I guess George Welsh retained his interest in you, and you wanted to go to UVA, and it ended up working out.
Yeah. I mean, like, so the good news is, I mean, you know, how these things come together, I don't know, but like I had all these coaches that for what, you know, I could have gone to Langley High, which is a public school. If I didn't have these coaches taking interest in me, none of this happens, but the football coaches there like took an interest in me, and they put value in kicking. Not a lot of high schools do. A lot of high schools are like, no, we kick off and we go for 2 every time. We don't kick any field goals, and an offensive lineman punts, go away. You know, these guys were like, no, this is important to us. Plus, you know, we want to push you. So they pushed me hard. And I got looked at by a number of schools and took a number of visits and all this kind of stuff. And I wasn't like a national recruit or anything like that, but I had options to go. And once Virginia offered a scholarship, I just said, that's where I'm going. I mean, you know, they could have said, we won't give you any scholarship. Why don't you come here? I probably would have said, yeah, I'll do that. You know, because that's where I wanted to go.
So when you arrived at UVA, I was there. I was in I guess I'd been a third year, your first year. What were your initial impressions of the grounds?
Yeah. All right. So I kind of, you know, knowing what Virginia's football history was up until that point, I kind of thought maybe this is just something that guys do on the weekends, and they give it the good college try, and their parents come to the game, and I say, oh, you really tried hard. You lost 80-0. You know, I wanted to be a good football player too, but you know, I also had this mindset like maybe they just have fun, and then their parents take them out to dinner afterwards, and then they go to a party, and then they go to classes, and nobody gives a rat's ass, right? No. Oh man, that got knocked out of me real quick. I remember, like, so, you know, Welsh was not the most talkative guy, of course, but I remember in summer practice, like, you know, freshmen get there early, and I remember walking down the hallway and I see him coming towards me and nobody else is around. And so when you see someone coming towards you that, you know, kind of the obvious thing is to say, hey, coach, or whatever your, you know, title might be. And so, hey, Coach Welsh. He looked at me like, who in the fuck are you? Like, I mean, this look from him was like, don't even ever talk to me again, and just kept walking. I'm like, okay, that's weird. And then the guys that I got to know, Ray Savage, Shawn Moore, Derek Dooley, Roy Brown, these guys made me realize, like, all right, they're here to win. I mean, they're taking this stuff seriously. And I liked it. I was like, all right, it's a little different than I thought. I thought this is just something guys do on the weekend and maybe get on TV and, oh, you really tried hard. No, they were like, no, that's not the way it is. And I liked it. Again, like I said, well, it's different, but it's like a sense of mission, and we're going to do this, and we can be good. We're going to be good, and this is serious stuff. And so you snap into it. But those guys, I mean, like Ray Savage, like I said, Ray, Shawn Moore, who I had to go to summer school before my freshman year, or else they wouldn't have let me in. But Ray and Shawn were there, Ron Carey, some other guys, and got to know them well. All right. And I could see that this was a different level of commitment than I thought was going to be the deal, but I was happy for it. Was ready to do it.
It had to be tough on you that I believe when you got there, was Kenny Stavlin still there, or he's already?
No,
there?
he had graduated the year earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it took you some time to get on the field. You were redshirted, and then you were for 2 years you were behind Mark Inderlied. And
yeah,
describe that. It must have been a tough situation for you to have to go.
It was weird. Yeah, they wanted me. They meet with everybody. Like, they bring you to the spring game after you've signed, and you do academic orientation and meet your position coach, and they're like, we really want you to push for the starting punting job this year. And I said, all right. And but when I got there, I mean, they had Joel Dempsey, your guy, Fred Carter, who this guy could punt it 100 yards. He was a little inconsistent. I mean, and I didn't work out a lot that summer. I kind of had a lot of fun right at summer school, and I was out of shape. And I had never kicked so much in my life. Like in high school, I just kicked when I wanted to. I'd be like, yeah, I'm done, or what, not doing anything today, whatever. Like I'd never kicked twice in a day. And by the third day, I literally couldn't walk. And here these guys are like, well, we want you to push for the position. And I'm like, I can't move. And so I was completely out of it, right? Out of the chase. But I also thought, not to be arrogant, and maybe if things turned out different, then I would sound stupid saying this, but I also remember thinking, like, yeah, I got what's going on here. I'm going to be better than these guys. I got it. This is not something that I can't figure out easily and get done. And again, if that would sound stupid if I didn't have the career I did, but I just but I look back and we talk about this. I was actually with Shawn Moore last week, and we talk about this. He wanted to come in. He found, when he was not going to be the starting quarterback, because they had Mikowski and Sequels, and he was like, I want to play DB and play my freshman year. And then he says very funnily, one of the first drills, he ran up to tackle Chris Warren and just got blown up. And he's like, forget this. But how different our world would have been if Shawn Moore played that 3 and 8 year and we don't have 1990. And I think of that as a blessing to me, that I'm like, well, thank goodness I didn't waste a year of eligibility being a lousy punter on a 3 and 8 team. Yeah, right. Yeah. So things work out, in some way. But I think what I learned from that is, like, every time a college coach recruits a kicker because they need a kicker, that's the worst thing. I think Welsh viewed it as, I'm just recruiting talent. This guy can kick and punt. While we want him to start, we just need an infusion of talent in this. It wasn't a kicking room back then, but they use a term like quarterback room. It was like I was just now one of the guys, a talented guy to push whoever is playing, or maybe become a starter myself. I think that's the right approach. You never want to be going into a season and saying, oh, we need to recruit a guy to kick for us next year, because so many guys just aren't ready, to make the transition. I certainly wasn't. And a lot of guys back then, I mean, the system has changed now, where you have to come in now and be ready. Back then, nobody was ready. I mean, offensive linemen were like 215 pounds. I mean, you got to put on 50 pounds, you redshirt. It's different now, What's
the relationship when you're fighting over one position, it could be quarterback, it could be kicker. Enrolling was the kicker. Obviously you don't want to miss field goals because if you don't want to lose the game, but you also want to be on the field. What was your relationship with Mark?
It was cool. I mean, like I say, as good as it could be for two guys competing for the same position. I mean, and I think that's for the most part, if you recognize, look, I mean, he's not going to be as good as he can be if I don't push him. And the only way I can get the job is by pushing him. There's no sense in it's like, it's like golf. You play the course, not the competition. I mean, don't worry about what he's doing.
Yeah.
Do what you do. And if I'm standing back there hoping he misses a kick, well, that's stupid. Why don't you just make yours? I mean, and so I think a lot of guys, game recognizes game and all this kind of stuff. People say, whatever. I think when you get to that level, you're like, yeah, I can't control what that guy does. I just got what I'd got and make it better. And there's no sense in, it doesn't mean you have to be friends and hang out, but like, don't need to hate the guy. That doesn't help either, man. So we did fine. I mean, I got along, like John Goen is one of my favorite guys. Husted afterwards. We got along fine. That guy was talented as hell, but John Goen was a freaking talent and never saw the field, unfortunately, by circumstances. But we're all cool. I think most guys are that way. Doesn't help you to hate the other guy. Yeah, maybe deep down you're like, but it doesn't help you to be like, oh, you're this kind of guy because you have the job or something. Doesn't work.
I know it's probably hard to be objective, but do you think you should have been on the field earlier than you were?
I did pretty well that summer with Mark. I think my numbers were, on par and this kind of stuff. I just think they might have thought that he was more ready for it by virtue of having been around and, that kind of thing. And maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe he's a little bit more seasoned and, but I think I could have, my numbers, I still have some of the sheets. They were pretty good, but I don't think they made the wrong decision at all. No, he is a talented guy too, man.
Well, so I know that, he's not the sweetest guy in the world, but how does a head coach affect the kicking game?
That guy knew everything. Yeah. And I think different teams do it differently where like kickers and punters are like some weirdos, and we were weirdos, but some weirdos on some different field that none of, it was all a team deal with him, and he knew everything you were doing. I remember like one time we were on some far end of the field and we had seen like a Monday night football game the night before where some guy did this cool onside kick, right? And so we're like, let's try this. And we're like trying to do these weird onside kicks. And I was like doing it pretty good, like, making a bounce real high or something. And then the next time we're doing like this onside kick practice, he's like, hey, McInerney, by this time Husted was like the kickoff guy. He's like, if we do an onside kick, I want you to do it because I saw you doing that thing the other day. And I'm like, man, you were like 3 fields away. What the hell's going on? That guy do everything, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I also read somewhere that he was willing to let someone else do kickoffs to save the kicker's legs. He also, he was involved in managing the playing time on the field, intimately involved.
Yeah. So it's weird because Husted comes in and he's a walk-on, but he's got this rocket leg, man. And, he played 8 years in the NFL. And so he actually, my third year, which was his true freshman year, he actually surpassed me on the depth chart for kickoffs. If Mark Inderlied went down, I was going to do field goals and Husted would do kickoffs. And I was like, who cares? We ain't going to play anyhow, so whatever. Then I had it in my mind going into my 4th year, which is the year I played. Like Husted's got the kickoff job. Who gives a crap? And I worked on him a little bit, but we went out 3 days and charted kickoffs. In all 3 days, somehow, maybe he got nervous. I don't know. And maybe I just hit the bombs of my life. I beat him out for kickoffs. I'm like, well, that's a freaking fine. How do you do? I didn't know I was going to do that too. And then so we go into Notre Dame, and like they had that Raghib Ismail guy, and it was embarrassing because they're like, they called them Skywalkers. They want to like do these Skywalkers. Do not kick it to him. We want you to kick it to the 20s and the corners. So here's my first game on national TV, and I'm like doing these bloop kickoffs, and I remember watching the replay of it. And the announcer's like, "Oh my God, this guy's got the worst kickoff we've ever seen." That may have been true, but fact was, in that game, it was on purpose to keep it away from Raghib. These, I was doing these weird little bloopers, right? And then Penn State, I kicked off pretty well, put a couple in the end zone, disastrously missed that field goal that almost cost us the game. And then things started going haywire. I was like, oh my God. And then like, I remember like in Duke, I hit one kickoff to the 25 or something. I was like, oh my God, I hope I have to never do these things again. And then that's when they called Husted in to do kickoffs. And I was like, all right, thank God I can focus on this, man. And I just started ripping off field goals. Husted was talented, man.
Well, is there a part of a kicker that maybe doesn't want the contact of a kickoff anyways? If I could just,
I thought it was a pain in the ass. I thought like my whole thing, I'd always tell guys like, well, why didn't you want to be a punter? And I'm like, I don't ever remember anyone kicking a game-winning punt. And field goals were kind of the same. I was like, can someone else do that? I just scored, man. Let me hang out. I just made this cool field. Yeah, you go do the kickoff. I mean, maybe that's a little arrogant or something. I just never dug it, man. It's just like, oh, you run up and kick it as far as you can. Any dummy can do that,
Well, Jake, you got off to a little bit of a slow start. You missed some field goals. Now you've been sitting there watching during the games for 3 years. It had to be, the nerves had to be getting to you a bit. Describe those first couple tries that you had.
Yeah, I got to admit, I mean, as cool as a cucumber as I think everyone wants to think they are, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be weird. Sorry, that was my cat. And get away. I did think that, man, maybe I've just kicked myself. Here comes my cat. All right, come on now. Run along. Playtime later. Sorry. Yeah, your child is asking your car. My cat wants to be tickled. But I did think it was over, man. And I started thinking like philosophically like that, like we talked about earlier, like, well, maybe now I'm gonna, become a fighter pilot or do something great in my life. This isn't working out. I did have those thoughts, and I don't know, man. I mean, but it's interesting. I got to tell you, like, so, I was 1 for 4. I mean, I remember, I missed against Penn State. We ended up winning, but boy, that was almost a disaster. Then I can tell you these kicks. I remember every one of them. Then we're at Georgia Tech, and I'm 38 yards, kind of towards the right hash. I hit that ball so perfectly, and it took off right towards the middle. And sometimes you hit a ball so well, it just kind of knuckles, and it was spinning right, but it just started knuckling, and it knuckled out. I was like, oh my God, I'm snake bit. Then the next kick was a 30-yarder at Georgia Tech. The freaking guy got his hand on it, but it still went through. And I'm like, what the frick? I might be 0 for 3, but made it through. But you could hear the guy tipping. He's like, I got it. But it still sailed through. And then at Duke, a 38-yarder, banged it off the upright. It was very windy that day and cold. And I kind of tried to play it to the left and have the wind, but it just went straight, bam. So I'm 1 for 4. We go into Clemson, at Clemson. Shawn's hurt. And this is weird. So you think of like, maybe you think of your days playing Robinson basketball or whatever it is. You always think of there was a time in your athletic life where you were on your zenith, the best you've ever done. Okay. So I'm in Clemson warmups, and Tim Finkelstein was my holder, and I'm drilling everything. And he's like, you haven't missed this week. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And he's like, no. Literally, you have not missed this week. And I'm like, oh, I know. Every time there was a snap and a hold, that whole entire practice week, warm-ups, that's like 180 to 200 kicks. And granted, we weren't trying 57 yarders. I mean, we're, within, back to 52 or whatever. I literally made every snap and held kick. And I'm like, yeah, I know, man. And then so I make 2 against Clemson. They were pretty big kicks, you know. I mean, we ended up losing the game, but you know, in terms of keeping drives going and everything. And so it was just weird. Like I had this mindset, like maybe my dream is over, but like, how is that possible? I just went like 180 for 180. And then it just, you know, and then by then I was no longer doing kickoffs too. And, you know, again, maybe you justify things that happen to you and you say, oh, that happened for the better. I never really want to do it anyways. But I kind of, I kind of didn't like doing kickoffs, man. Part of it was like, oh, you know, here comes a guy, I'm going to have to tackle him, which I do have 2 solo tackles, but I just didn't dig it, you know. But
Yeah, and I
and then
guess
next week, you know, 2 for 2 against North Carolina, and you know that week, that practice week, I'd missed 1. So that those 2 weeks, Clemson week and North Carolina, I was 21 years old. That was probably the zenith of my athletic career, you know.
that's right.
Like,
And then you went on a roll in the games. You're already on a roll in practice. And once you start making them, does it feel easy out there? The pressure kind of goes away and it becomes pretty routine.
no, because what I thought, you know, I said, look, you know, everyone's like, oh, now you got a streak going. That's great. And I'm like, no, see the way, because I also had a streak of missing. So you don't, so I wasn't going to keep that streak alive, right? So my thing was always like, and this is a common kicker mantra, I think. I mean, even probably Moseley taught me this. He's like, no, you're only worried about the next kick. And he's, you know, he's like, you tell me now that you can make 100 extra points in a row. And, you know, every kicker would be like, something bad's going to happen. No, I'd probably make 98. And he's like, no, you got it wrong. You're making the next extra point. And then at the end of the day, you count those up. That's 100 in a row. But you're not thinking the overall. You just say, here's the ball, here's the post. I'm going to get this one through. And then the next one, you know, so I didn't think of it in terms of momentum at all. That was not even a thought. It was just like, this is the next kick. And then at the end of the week, oh, look, you made 180 of them out of 180, you know?
What percentage of kicking is mental and what percent is physical?
Well, you got to have the physical skill set first. I mean, you know, like you talk to a Navy SEAL and you'd be like, oh, it's all mental. Yeah, it's all mental if you can bench press 400 pounds and run like a sub 4 mile in sand. Then it's all mental, but 99.9% of Americans can't do that. So I would say you have to develop the physical side first, and then it's mental. And then, you know, I'd say it's if once you have the physical skills down, you know, it's very, very mental. And I always thought of myself as pretty mentally strong. I mean, you know, like I said, my dad was a fighter pilot, and you know, he taught me stuff about that kind of stuff, about how to be mission focused and that kind of stuff. And so I think that was one of my strong suits. I'd been around kickers. So I was not a technical guy. I mean, I knew I was a feel guy, right? And I never did that thing where you go back and do 2 steps over. I just went straight back because I could see my line and then go straight back to the ball and kick it, right? But a lot of guys would be like, oh, where's my hip or where's my plant foot? And I'm like, man, you're not going to be able to process that when it gets, you know, nervous time, man. If you got to forget about all that stuff and just go up and jam it, dude. And that was my mindset. Just, you've done this a million times, just do it one more, you know?
Well, Tom Perrin was a great sports psychologist right there, worked with the basketball team primarily. Did you guys ever talk to Tom? And also, sports psychology is much bigger now than it is. Back in 1980, you would go see the sports psychiatrist if you missed too many layups. But
Right.
nowadays, it's part of the training process. You know, so what was the relationship with the psychologist? And nowadays, I'm sure they probably do a lot more of that, don't they?
Yeah, it was a class there.
Yeah, I took it.
Yeah, and I took it, and I probably didn't do too well in it, but whatever. But no, there's a lot of lessons in there about undermotivated overachievers and, you know, letting go, I think, was one of the lessons, and all the stuff you hear today. And you're right. Pretty compelling stuff. I mean, I honestly think I had a lot of that mindset already, just because, you know, I'd paid attention to other kickers and what they would say. And like, you just, you know, like letting go was one of the terminologies used in the sports psychology class. That's, in other words, just go up and hit it. You know, you've done it a million times, just do it again, man. Don't think about it. Just hit it. So I think we know the lessons. If you pay attention, you might just call them different names. But it's kind of interesting because like my nephew is a Navy SEAL, right? A former Navy SEAL. He had a medical issue, but like now he's on a app where, because he got his master's in sports psychology, he played basketball at Virginia Tech. This great story, man. Walked onto the basketball team, and the coach Seth Greenberg was like, "Hey, man, you're a natural leader and you love working out. Here's a book about Navy SEALs." And then so Will Johnson read it and went crazy and became a Navy SEAL. And but then he had a brain tumor and had to leave. And then he got a sports psychology degree. And yeah, his business, it's an app where, you know, if you play tennis and you need like a quick little, hey, I got this mental thing going on, you know, he's does that, and it's a very big business. And I almost think it's like, it's not sports psychology. It is, but I'd say it's performance psychology, right? Like if you're in business and you got this big meeting and you for the account, you know, that was going to help feed your kids, like, oh my God, what do I do? Well, here's how you do it. You've done it a million times. Just get in there like you've done it before. I think that's the lesson I would take. And I think everybody needs to know that performance psychology.
Yeah.
Right? Pressure.
I'm sorry, Jake. How
No,
about the composition of the kicking team? Like nowadays, the long snapper is a really big deal. They train separately. Every team has one or two. That's all they do. You know, that was probably just formulating when you were playing. So what was the composition of a kicking team, UVA's kicking, you know, little team, and then how has that changed in today's game?
Well, first of all, I mean, the kickers, punters, and snappers, but kickers, they're vastly different on a talent level. And I think that's due to a few things. One is the pool of athletes out there is just ginormous now. I mean, you know, just by general demographics, you know, the high school age population is huge. And so you got more guys competing for about the same number of spots, right? And so, you know, I remember speaking to Dustin Hopkins at some golf charity event. He kicked for the Redskins or the Commanders in Florida State and all this kind of stuff. And I still think he's in the NFL. And I remember chatting with him. He's like 6'3", 210. And, you know, I'm like, oh my God, you look like Anthony Poindexter. And, you know, I was like, what, you know, what kind of 40 do you run? Runs like a 4.5, right? Okay. Back in my day, there's no way you're kicking field goals. I mean, you're 6'2", 200, run a 4.5. They'd be like, get away from that tee, dude. You're our safety or, you know, wide receiver. When I was doing it, like kickers were more like guys that wanted to play football that couldn't. So the talent level is way different. The expectations are absurdly different now. I mean, like Ray Guy averaged 42 yards gross. You got to average 45 net in the NFL or you're the bottom half of the league. These guys are like 6'3", 220. They're making millions of dollars. And so, and they're, you know, the field goal kicking percentage is like 90%. Guys are bombing. There's a guy in the NFL you've never heard of that's made 3 60-plus yard field goals. And he gets cut regularly. I mean, it's absurd. So I think the whole ball of wax has changed. It was, you know, it was pretty sophisticated when we were doing it. I mean, snappers were learning to, you know, snap it and rotate the ball. So the laces were forward every time. They were figuring that out. Mostly our snappers were offensive linemen. We had like one or two guys like Bill Curry and Cliff Harris that were designated snappers. But that was kind of unheard of or still new at that point. You know, and holders, you would try to get a quarterback or a receiver. I actually worked with Ed Garno. He was a punter to be a holder, but it was mostly quarterbacks and receivers. Way more sophisticated now, way better athletes now, I would say. But, and like I said, I alluded to earlier, every team is different. I think in the, you know, the perception is like kickers were just some guys that weren't. Welsh's team was different. I mean, you know, I'd say like everyone says, oh, kickers aren't real football players because all they do is kick. And I'd be like, yeah, I kind of agree with you. But by the same token, like, has an offensive lineman ever caught a touchdown pass or, you know, has a quarterback ever, you know, covered a wide receiver going long? You know, every position is pretty specialized. You know, I get it from the perspective we're not out banging, cracking heads every day, but you know, we were in there every day as part of the deal, you know.
Yeah. Like the amount of kids that play soccer now has increased exponentially. So we have more kids that are using their feet, and so some of those kids will trickle over to the football field, and I think we have a bigger pool. Let's get back to the 1989 season. Now, I know you made a big kick against Louisville. That probably I know you had a streak going into that game, but that probably kind of turned your season around, because that game led us to the Citrus Bowl, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Well, all of them did, but
Oh,
no.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, it was, it was interesting. I mean, I guess it was like that classic, last minute kicker situation where, you run out, they call time, we had to call timeout to stop the clock, and then you run out and you're lining up, and then they call timeout, and it's supposed to freak you out, right? And I was always like, why do they do that? Because like you're expecting them to. It'd be weird if they didn't. You'd be like, what are they calling timeout? Oh no, snap. Like I was just kind of standing there, okay, and then they're going to call timeout, and I was like, all right, and then I kind of was standing in the middle of the field, and like I turned around and I saw the other goalposts, and they're so far away, and I'm like, oh, just pretend those are the goalposts, and then when you turn around, these will look closer, right? And then Welsh was like, hey, come over here, and so I go running over there, and he's like, no, you got to stand here, and then we're gonna, just so it's like routine, he's so big into routine. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. And then we're going to come in, like normally do, with those field goal team, and then go and kick it. So it was cool. And then, just kicked it, man. Like I'd done 100 times, a million times, man.
Yeah. So mentally,
you got to let go.
Yeah. It wasn't really heavy on your mind. You just went there like you did in practice and just shot it.
No, because the way, like another mantra I had, and I maybe I made it up, or some other guy told me, was like, they say, are you nervous? Yeah, hell yeah, I'm nervous. I'm never scared. But, I was always at a constant level of agita and nervousness. And so when I went out on the field, like, it wouldn't be like, oh, I'm cool and calm and collected. Now it's nerve time. No, I was always like, oh, like the whole game. I was like, ready to go, man, and so when you run out on the field, and they're very tiring, man. I remember like after a game, I'd always have to go home and sleep, and people were like, what the frick is wrong with you? You stood there, and I'm like, yeah, dude, but I was keyed up the whole game because I didn't want to be, like I said, relaxed and then run out on the field, and, oh my God. So very tiring.
So what was your relationship with the student body? Now, those moments when you missed a field goal that we needed, those moments when you're finally on the field, and you're having a great year. Are people beginning to recognize you around campus? Did it change?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were, but again, that's one of the things that I kind of cherish from that time. That okay, you're recognized as a football player, but you also, I walked around in jeans and flip flops and a torn up T-shirt, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're some regular guy." And yeah, I mean, some people would recognize you, and of course, you want that recognition. That's why you do it. But I think most of the guys there, I mean, we were still kind of not known as like this football thing, and it was kind of novelty and unique. And oh my gosh, Shawn Moore. I mean, like they always tell the story, like I think it was the first George Bush came to speak at some event at U-Haul, and they, of course, they tell him what to say with, and some quip or something. And he's like, oh my God, it's hard to imagine. I'm the president, and I got all these, famous politicians here. And the most famous guy on campus is Shawn Moore. And everyone kind of looked, who? What's he talking about? Like to give it balance, we were still kind of like these new guys, man. I mean, and we could be regular students. And I think most of the guys there kind of cherish that experience of just, like, yeah, people care, but not that much,
And when you became this machine and you had this really nice streak going, did it change your relationship with your teammates, like Chris Slade and all the guys, or all of a sudden are you more popular?
I don't think so, man. I'd like to think they always liked me. I was kind of a little bit of a ringleader off the field in terms of getting stuff done. And, I think they liked me. I mean, I do remember like this one time, like I'd missed, when I missed against Penn State, and then I think I'd missed, whatever. And like Ray Savage, I was buddies with, and Ray's cool. He's like, man, you ever do that again, I'm going to rip your head off or something. I'm like, man, screw you, dude. I mean, do I ever come up to you and say you miss a tackle? I mean, first of all, I couldn't because she'd kill me. But like, I'm like, man,
You're the guy.
get out of my face, dude. I'm out here working as hard as you. I don't want to miss. And I think he kind of respected that. I mean, I didn't say it because I wanted him to respect it. It's just kind of what I thought. But I think the guys were like, I mean, yeah, they probably would have thought I was an idiot if I'd missed pins against Louisville and whatever. But no, I don't think they viewed me any different. I don't, you know.
Let's get to your senior year, the historic 1990 year. I know this is here, as we mentioned earlier, you've thought lots about. I know some of the big moments of the year. Before we get to the Georgia Tech game, is the Clemson game. We haven't beaten Clemson. I'm not sure how long. Clemson had destroyed us and had owned us, and we beat them, and that really put us on the map. And then we won most of the games very easy. But as you said before, a lot of times when you make a field goal, that's involved in the momentum of the game. So when you look at the scores and you're winning by 15, 20 points, maybe Jake McInerney had impact in games that I may have forgotten about. So tell us a little bit about the early part of that season and some of the your hits and misses. Well, I think they were mostly hits.
Yeah, like I don't know that we knew we'd be that good. I think we had some expectations, and like Shawn and Herman were on the cover of Sporting News, back when that was a big deal. Now with the internet, like none of that matters, but like that was the thing, Sporting News. Oh my God, like people are paying attention to us, and we blow out Kansas. And I got a funny story. Let me digress a little bit here. So it's a summer before that year, before our 5th year, and Shawn and Chris Slade and Terry Kirby are up in Northern Virginia. Somebody got them a job where like hotels would have all these kids for, to do tours of the Capitol, and those guys would be security guards, and they didn't have guns or anything, but they just sit and like if kids were tearing stuff up or what, I don't know, they had this job. And then so Shawn calls me one day. He's like, "Hey man, where's a good place to work out?" And I'm like, "I don't know, man. I don't work out." But I knew Bill Renner was a punter, and I worked with him, and he has started his coaching career up here. He became a really famous coach up here, and his son Bryn Renner was a QB at North Carolina. But I knew Bill was the coach at West Springfield High, and I called him. I said, "Hey Bill, I got these buddies that are in town. They need a place to work out, and maybe He's like, "Yeah, man," and he knew who they were, and he's like, "Yeah, bring them over." And I said, "All right." And so I had this wrecked up old 74 Ford Granada, man. This thing was, and it had Nevada license plates because my dad's Air Force thing, you didn't have to get your car inspected in Nevada. So this thing was not highway legal. I mean, there's wires coming out of the tires. It was just ganked up. And so I go pick these guys up. Shawn in the front seat, Kirby and Slade in the back seat of my Granada, driving them over to West Springfield. Somehow, I don't know what happened. Either I ran a red light or something, or some other guy. I'm in an intersection, and it's like all these squealing tires on it. Oh my God. And like nothing, I avoided a wreck, but I was like, oh my God. I almost got in this freaking gigantic wreck with Shawn Moore, Terry Kirby, and Chris Slade. Could that have derailed that season? Of course it would. So like I was like sweating, and then we get over to West Springfield and they work out, and a bunch of kids like Bill Renner was running a practice for his team, and all these kids are like crazy about Shawn Moore and Chris Slade and Kirby. They knew him, and they're like, "Oh my God!" So it was cool. So that was a little weird story, but okay. So we blow out Kansas, and then I think that's when we're rolling into Clemson week. The thing that I always look back on and say, "Oh my God, how so weird this is." Danny Ford was no longer the coach. I always wanted to beat Danny Ford because he recruited me in high school, but then ultimately he didn't offer me. Said you can walk on, and like he was no longer the coach. But we beat him, and I think we had an idea we were going to beat him. I mean, you always have in the back of your head, like we always think we're going to beat him, but for 29 times we haven't. But man, rolling into that game, I'm pretty sure we were like, yeah, we're going to beat him. We got him. New coach. I mean, that might have been the thing. We're like, it's no longer Danny Ford, man.
I forgot that he was no longer there that season. Well, things went really smoothly for a while. I remember when you guys became number one. I was a law student. I was living on the corner. And I remember the day I walked by Menser's and they had USA Today. UVA was number one.
Yeah.
It was so weird. I just remember picking up the paper. I bought the paper, and I couldn't believe it. And we're getting ready for Georgia Tech. And when I was watching the Georgia Tech game, I remember the first half. Things were going smoothly. I mean, this is going to be a blowout like the rest of the games. And I even remember we had backup linemen in the game, which you don't see backup linemen that often in the college football game. So
Right.
I just felt like things were going to form. And then I just felt like all hell broke loose and everything that could go wrong went wrong for us.
Yeah, I think it's a story of halftime adjustments. I mean, I think they were able to see what we were doing both on offense and defense and figure it out, and they made the adjustments. I don't think in any shape, form, or fashion. I mean, I've heard guys say, "Oh, we called the dogs off in the second half." I don't see that at all. I think that guy was so nervous about doing stuff like that. In a million years, I couldn't see him doing anything like that. I just think it was Georgia Tech made their halftime adjustments, man. You know.
Well, Bobby Ross, the coach, I guess he'd been at the University of Maryland, which I used to watch him. My great coach ended up going to the Lions, but they had a kicker, Scott Sisson.
Yeah.
Did you know him? He hit the game-winning field goal.
No, I did. I mean, I knew him like I knew any other ACC kicker, like just some guy. But yeah, he made that, and it was like, here's what I thought we should have done. You always think of the great things 20 years later, right? But I remember Virginia Tech, they brought back this basketball player for his 5th year to block field goals. And the guy was 6'7" and could jump out of the gym. And they said, why not? And how Beamer was like this great special teams guy. I always thought like we should have had call it some cool name like field goal emergency or something, and roll Herman Moore out there and just be like, just jump, dude. Because, he was a 7-foot high jumper. Boom. And maybe put him out there early on a game for an extra point and just be like this giant monster that jumps up and the kicker's like, oh my God. And then for the rest of the game, the kicker's freaked out. Or just throw him in there at the last second when the kicker's not expecting it. Bam, block it. Because maybe you wouldn't want to do it the whole game because you don't want to hurt Herman Moore. But I was always like, why didn't we ever do like Virginia Tech did and have Herman just jump in the middle? But who knows? Yeah, I didn't think the guy was going to miss it. I mean, it was 37 yards and boom, make it. And he did.
Yeah, I'll never forget how quiet this kind of stadium was when we left that stage. It was. I'll never forget this the silence. And then we get back on the bike and we beat UNC on the road, which was a nice win for us. But again, the season was unraveling quickly. We lost badly to Maryland, and Shawn got hurt, lost badly to Tech.
Yeah.
And then we end up redeeming ourselves with a really nice performance in the Sugar Bowl. We weren't able to win, but we did play well. We did justify our bid, that early bowl bid, which wouldn't have been there in today's game.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on the late part of that season?
Well, I think, God, man, I mean, I would feel a tad flat against UNC. I mean, we beat them handily 24-10, but, we were used to like being like 59-10 or something, right? And UNC that year, I don't think was particularly good. And so I was like, this is kind of weird, man. I'm not a player out there doing the stuff they're doing, but I was like, maybe more from a fan's perspective, like, it seemed kind of weird. We just kind of cakewalk 24-10. Huh. And then against Maryland, man, they were like not a good team. And it just was like, we're at home and it's like a ping pong game. We're scoring, they're scoring, blah, blah, blah. Like, what the frick? And then Shawn hurt his thumb and then they win. And then it's like, I think by that point, I got to say, I think a lot of guys, probably me included, not that I had that big an outcome on the games like these guys did, but nonetheless, maybe I was more, a reflection of what guys are thinking. I think we're like, yeah, who gives a shit? Like, what happened?
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, that's maybe neither here nor there accurate, but I do feel there's some kind of like resignation to it's over,
Yeah. Well, your UVA career is over, and you made the most of your 2 years. As I mentioned earlier, 31 of 37 field goals, and 89 of 90 point after touchdowns. So you had great statistics. I think you led the league in points for 1 year, at least for kickers. So it was an amazing time for you. Did you consider going to the next level and trying out for the
I
NFL?
did. Like I was like by some guys, and who knows? I mean, it was less. There was no internet back then, but some guys had me like rated as high as second coming out, and there were some good kickers coming out. John Casey, who played like 20 years, like so. Seattle came and looked at me, and they were like, "Oh yeah," because Rusty Tillman was the special teams coach. Rusty Tillman was Mark Moseley's buddy.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So I think Mark Moseley said, "Hey, you got to really take a look at this guy. I've worked with him for years, and blah blah blah." And so he came out and looked at me. And he's like, "Yeah, I like what I see. I don't know what we're going to do this year for a kicker, but maybe draft you, maybe bring you to camp. Don't know." But then I do remember him saying, "Man, like, have you heard of this John Casey guy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that guy from Georgia. Man, that guy's like Morton Anderson or something." I was like, "Oh my God, man, that's like, are you kidding?" Well, they drafted him fourth, right? In the fourth round, not fourth overall. And he ended up playing like 20 years. So I had a number of, people always say, "Do you have tryouts?" Yeah, tons of tryouts, like where guys would come in or fly me out. Like Atlanta came and looked at me 3 or 4 times. Kent Herock, and I don't know what they ended up doing. And then Cleveland flew me in and this, that, and the other. But I ended up signing with Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And it was interesting because like Virginia was not like Alabama or some high level program, but I thought we were pretty sophisticated. And then I go to Tampa Bay and I'm like, is this like minor league football? I mean, it was like the grungiest facilities, just the goofiest like coaches, like what it just seemed disjointed. And maybe that's the NFL, or I don't know. It just seemed like a weird thing. Keith McCants, who was younger than I was, and he was kind of cool. He was the team captain. I'm like, what kind of leadership is this? He's 21 years old, man. You'd think it'd be like some 30-year-old, but I mean, he's a great player, but like, just seems so weird. So I was at Tampa Bay for a while. Steve Christie was there, and that guy, the reason I said Tampa Bay was like, Steve Christie had a great year the year before. He's a free agent from William and Mary. And I knew, I saw him kick and I was like, that guy's incredibly talented. But, the way they did free agent contracts back then, it's probably the same. It was a 1-year deal with the 1-year option at the club's option at a fixed increase. So, it was a base salary of $109 a year. And then the club, if they wanted to keep you around, could increase that with like 10%. And you're there. The player had no say in it. Well, Steve Christie goes down there as a free agent, makes the team, and is the offensive MVP. He's 23 of 25, which back then is unheard of. That was tight. And so he's like, "Hey, I know you have this option, but unless we do a new contract, I might not come back," right? Because he wanted like $500,000 or something. And so the guy at Tampa Bay, who was like, he's like, "Hey, he may not come back." And, this is going to be a gold, because I knew I couldn't beat him out. But I was like, oh man, this might be a little gold mine of an opportunity here. So I go down there, in the first few days, it's just me. And I see, he's there, like he's working out and he's standing in the doorway looking out or something. And that guy, man, like, kickers sometimes get goofed with by players, and it's fine. That guy walked through the locker room like people parted. I mean, he just had this look like, I will rip your freaking head off. I mean, he was built like a hockey player. He's from Canada, and he, kind of a wiry guy and just kind of a real serious guy, but kind of cool. And so he'd be standing there in the doorway and watching, and I'd kick, during practice, whatever. And then like 3 or 4 days in, he's back. He signed. And I don't know what happened, because back then, there might have been a blurb in USA Today or something. It just wasn't all this information available. And I either think that the team was like, all right, this guy McInerney is so lousy. We gotta pay Christie whatever he wants, That's one scenario that's in my head. Or Christie was watching me and he's like, man, that guy McInerney's good. I better come back out and get my job back. I think it was more the first thing where the team was like, oh my God, give Christie what he wants, man. This ain't going to work. So yeah, I was there for like 3 or 4 weeks and it was cool. But I knew the writing was on the wall. It came down to kickoffs, by the way. Just funny story. They were doing this kickoff return drill, and Christie would kick one, and I actually got pretty decent at it because I was like, all right, well, this is how it's got to be. You got to be able to hit these now, and they're doing this thing where they wanted us to kick it to the right corner. It wasn't a kickoff cover drill; it was a kickoff return drill. How they return a right corner kick, and they wanted the returner then to cut across the field. All those blockers would be here, and I hit one and I kicked it down the middle. And the guy, the other coach who was trying to set up the return was like, "Hey," I said, "Right," and I said, "I know, man." And then again, I kick it and it goes down the freaking middle, and the guy starts freaking out. And then the head coach is like, "Hey," he's yelling at the guy like, "Hey, we told you we want to return." Not me, he's yelling at the coach like, we're working on this right corner return. And the guy's like, "Yeah, I know, but if your dumbass kicker can't kick it over there, what do you want me to do?" And then I was like, I think this is my last day here. Literally, I'm walking off the freaking field and some guy, I guarantee he didn't know my name, comes up to me, my little jersey and stuff. And he's like, "The coach wants to see you and bring your playbook." And I literally had a playbook, and that's how it went down. I was like, yeah, I knew it. Yeah, and I had a playbook. It was like kickoff coverage, stupid stuff. And so that was it.
And you never tried out for NFL?
I did, and then I played a game of arena football for the Orlando Predators, right? Mm-hmm. And you got paid $400, and we played at the New Orleans Voodoo or New Orleans Night or something like that. And we played them in Mobile, Alabama. It was like an 8-hour bus ride from Orlando to Mobile. You got paid $400 a game, $500 or an extra $100 if you won. And you got 1 beer on the bus ride back if you lost, 2 if you won. And so we lost, and a lot of the guys didn't drink. So I would go around collecting their beers because it was an 8-hour drive. And I was just like, back then, nobody was coming from arena to the NFL. I mean, subsequent to that, like Kurt Warner made it from. I was just like, man, I want to play in the NFL. This ain't going to help me. So I quit that, and then I tried like Canadian Football League, Sacramento Gold Miners, and I signed with the World League, but they folded. And I was getting on. I was like, now I'm 25, and I just said it's over. I got to get a job, man. So I did.
Well, Jake, this has been great, man. Great meeting you. I remember watching a lot of these field goals that we talked about today. Well, just tell us a little bit about how you spent the last 30 years since after your football years were over. I know you're still in Northern Virginia, so yeah, share what you want.
Yeah, no, I mean, I ended up getting into commercial real estate, and that was good. We benefited from all the things that were going on in the late 90s and early 2000s with the .com and the high tech stuff. I mean, all that growth helped us. And then around 2010, 2011, I took a little bit of a change. Some things happened not to me, but like my mom passed away and my dad had some issues. So I stopped working for a while. And then I went into commercial construction that's how I know Eggy. His family is part of the Pisano construction family. And so I started working with Bobby on commercial construction. I was doing primarily business development, but I'd do estimates and run some jobs just so I knew what was going on. And I always wanted to do that to learn how to, learn what I was selling, and say, here's how our process works and here's the benefit to you and that kind of stuff. So I did that for like 8 years, and right around COVID, but not because of COVID. It just happened to be coincidental to it. I just said, I'm going to retire.
Wow. That's I admire that. Because
it just means I can't buy as much stuff as I wanted to before, but I can do what I want.
You earned it. That's great. Yeah. Well, look, I guess, maybe you could, Billy Carbaugh, who recommended I called you, said great George Welsh invitation. So maybe we could sign off with one of your George Welsh invitation.
Yeah. All right. So I got two favorite stories of Welsh. I mean, everyone does that nasal thing, and that's very true. God, Christ, everyone's got that. But the two favorite Welsh stories I got is like my second, and so Bruce McGonigal was and is one of my good friends, right? And we talk a lot. But we were doing this kickoff drill where we were, the team kicking off, and we were scout team, and I was kicking off, and then remember back in the day, like a lot of teams would have a guy stand next to the tee backwards with his arms up, and when the kicker started running, he'd throw his arms down so the rest of the team would come running down. So this particular team we're playing, it might have been South Carolina or something, had that guy. So Bruce was that guy, and I was the kickoff guy. Well, my jockstrap blew out, right? I mean, this is how they connect underneath. Well, the thing broke, and it was just kind of flopping around. So I was like, all right. I thought it'd be kind of funny. I took it outside my pants. So I had my jockstrap. Now it's outside my pants. And this is what I did in practice, right? This is probably why I didn't start my second year. So I take it outside, and I got it hanging outside, and Bruce is facing this way. And I'm like, hey, Bruce, I'm 10 yards away. I'm like, hey, man, check it out. Hey, look at here, and he's like kind of nodding his head. And I'm like, come on, man, this is funny. And then, I kind of see his eyes dart to my side. I have my arm up, to signal when they blow the whistle. And there's Welsh right underneath me, looking right up at me, because he's kind of, he's 5'7". He's like, hey, McInerney. And the only thing I could think of to say was, yes, sir. Like, that looks stupid. My jockstrap's hanging out. What the hell's so funny? And now I got my jockstrap all balled up in my hand, thinking he wouldn't see it. He knows what's going on. Nothing, sir. Like stupid, like, sir. And he's like, yeah, you mess around more than anyone I've ever known, on and off the field. And I was like, I had these two thoughts going on in my head. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get kicked off the team now. But then I was also thinking, like, he's known a lot of guys, and I'm the one. That's not bad, And I was like, just stupid stuff like that. But yeah, he was, you see, and here's the final thing I'll say on Welsh. One of the great lessons in life. Everyone will say, oh, like he was this guy, right? Like, and he didn't like hanging out with players, and he wasn't a player's coach. And I said, look, man, I think everyone that went through that system probably appreciated that. We didn't want a 50-year-old buddy. We saw what he was doing. He treated us like we were in the military, like he's the officer and we're the guys that, we don't consort with them and stuff like that. And you knew for fact that guy was not letting a personal decision enter into his matrix of whether you play or not. If you did what he said the way he wanted it, you're going to play. And we to a man, we appreciated that. And I think, if you were to ask me about the coaches today and like, what do you think about this coach and his approach? What this tells me is there's no approach, right? Because everyone could say about Welsh, like, he's treated the media this kind of way, like where he'd kind of, be all gruff with them, and he wasn't buddies with the players, but he won. And so people would say, well, that's why he won, because he was that way. But then if another coach does that, they're like, that's why he lost. You got to do it this way. You can do anything. As long as you win, you can be a player's coach. Well, that's why you won. Or if you didn't win, that's why you lost. It's all boils down to if you win or lose. And that's, you don't get that in a lot of life, that kind of instant feedback. But, Welsh gave it to you. Yeah. And we all appreciated that.
Yeah. And so do students and big fans of the university. We remember those days when UVA was the whipping boy of Virginia Tech, and we didn't have a great program, and George Welsh and players like yourself helped to turn it around. And I think we've been good in football and basketball ever since. So it's been exciting. Well, look, Jake, this has been great. I took you longer. I kept you longer than I promised, but it was great. You have great stories, and maybe at some point, doesn't seem like you're doing much these days. We should connect and get a beer in person.
Agreed. I'm in.
Yeah.
I love it.
Again, Jake, I enjoyed meeting you. Thanks for doing this.
Likewise. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy.
Thanks.